Trinidad and Tobago on Twitter. Our call sign is @TTParliament.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the Supreme Being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Announcements by the President.
Honorable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator the Honorable Paula Gopi-Skoon, who is out of the country. Honorable Senators, I have received the following correspondence dated March the 16th, 2018, from then President Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, ORTT-SC. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, by His Excellency Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, ORTT-SC, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. To Ms. Ayana Lieber-Lewis, whereas Senator the Honorable Paula Gopi-Skoon is incapable of performing her duties as a senator by reason of her absence from Trinidad and Tobago, now therefore I, Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, do hereby appoint you, Ayana Lieber-Lewis, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 20th of March 2018 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator, the Honorable Paula Gopi-Skoon. given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President, St. Anne's, this 16th day of March, 2018. Honorable Senators, the Senator is required to take the oath.
I, Ayana Lewis, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I'm about to enter.
Bills brought from the House of Representatives under supplemental order paper, the registration of titles to land amendment number 2 Bill 2017 in the name of the Attorney General. Papers.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed in the supplemental order paper in the name of the Minister of Finance. The Tax Administration Diagnostic Assessment Tool Performance Assessment Report on Trinidad and Tobago, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the National Agricultural Marketing and Development Corporation for the year ended September 30, 2010.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper in the name of the Minister of Planning and Development and on the supplemental order paper in the name of the Attorney General. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Planning and Development to the 14th report of the Public Accounts Committee, second session 2016-2017, on the examination of the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year 2016, with specific reference to the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. The Family Proceedings Amendment Rules 2018, the Criminal Procedure Amendment Rules 2018, and the Children Court Rules 2018.
Reports from committees.
Senator Small.
Madam President, I have the honor to present the following report as listed on the supplemental order paper in my name. The 7th report of the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises, 3rd session, 2017-2018, 11th Parliament, on an inquiry into the efficiency and effectiveness on the Education Facilities Company Limited in managing the construction and repair of government and government-assisted schools.
Questions?
Senator Richards.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Madam President. To the Minister of Health, based on reports that the MRI machines at both Mount Hope and San Fernando General Hospital are now not operational, can the Minister indicate what immediate alternative arrangements have been put in place to assist patients?
Minister of Health, you have
Thank
2
you.
minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. I am grateful for the opportunity to put the record straight. There's a program of scheduled maintenance under the Public Sector Investment Program, PSIP, for the scheduled upgrade of medical equipment. The MRI at the San Fernando Hospital was taken offline in November and December for scheduled upgrades, and all parties were informed. Those upgrades are finished and the machine is fully operational. The MRI at Eric Williams was taken off for scheduled upgrades, where we are upgrading the software, the electronics, we are replacing cabinets, we are changing off boards, we are putting in new coils and new applications, especially for cardiac interventions. These are scheduled upgrades under the PSIP. In the interim, if there's any patient at Eric Williams who needs an MRI, they will be facilitated and are being facilitated either in the private sector or at San Fernando, where the machine has already been upgraded. Madam President, it is good to note that under the PSIP for the period 2010 to 2015, only 32% of the funds allocated for these types of works were ever used. Under the PSIP for this administration, as of this January 2018, we have already used 54% of the funds allocated for upgrade of machines like these. So this is all part of the scheduled upgrades for both machines. The machine in San Fernando is fully functional after the upgrade, and the one at Eric Williams is being upgraded as per schedule. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Senator Richards.
Thank you, Minister, for the update. In the interest of public clarity, can the Minister indicate if the schedule of this occur at specific times so that future misinformation and misunderstandings can't take place? Because I think you indicated November and December. Are these specific times annually, or are they as scheduled by the end users or the operators?
Minister.
Thank you. They are not annual. They are determined by the internal monitoring and evaluation and maintenance schedule we have, plus directions from the manufacturers as to when end of life for certain parts happen. So they are not annual, but they are known in advance, and we are now advising all our stakeholders, both internal and external, in advance as to when these scheduled upgrades are taking place.
Senator Richards.
Madam President, thank you again, Minister. Can the Minister indicate what methods are used to apprise the public? Because, again, thank you for your information. Sometimes the information goes out through the wrong channels, unofficial as that, and that's where the confusion sometimes comes in.
Minister.
Thank you. We use both internal communications and external via press ads. That is what we do.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. To the Minister of Works and Transport, what action is being taken by the ministry to address the threat posed by the approximately 60-year-old bridge adjacent to the Monkey Tongue Presbyterian Primary School?
Minister of Works and Transport,
Thank you.
You have 2 minutes.
Madam President, the problem with the bridge was being monitored, and a decision was taken to close. It will be temporarily closed from tomorrow in order to facilitate the erection of a Bailey Bridge. The construction of the new bridge will now be added to our bridge program as a priority. Thank you.
Senator Mark.
Because of the significance of that particular bridge to the people of that part of the country, can the Minister indicate how long this Bailey Bridge will take to be erected or constructed or be laid?
Minister.
Thank you. Madam President, the history of the erection of Bailey Bridges happens within a couple of days. So I know the ministry is mobilizing as we speak to have that bridge installed in the shortest possible time.
Senator Mark.
Can the Minister give this Parliament the undertaking that the bridge will be installed within the next 10 days? Can you give the guarantee?
Senator Mark, I won't allow that question.
Okay.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Madam President, the government is pleased to announce that we'll be asking for a deferral of 2 weeks for questions number 59, and also a deferral of 2 weeks for questions number 69, 70, and 71, largely because the Minister of Trade and the Minister of Sport and Youth Affairs is out of the country on government business. We will be answering all other questions on the order paper.
So questions 59, 69, 70, and 71 are deferred for 2 weeks. Senator Mark.
Is it question number 60?
60, yes.
I find it very disturbing, to be honest. Question number 60 to the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Sorry, Madam President. Madam President, the increased revenues collected in excess of the budgeted estimates for the first quarter of 2018 were from the non-oil sector. However, there was a shortfall in the collection of petroleum revenues during the first quarter of the fiscal year in the sum of 105 million Trinidad and Tobago dollars, primarily as a result of the non-remittance of royalties owed by Petrotrin and curtailment of production arising from maintenance work. In light of the above, Section 13(1)A of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund Act, number 6 of 2007, is not applicable, given that there were no excess petroleum revenues for the period under review, as defined by the Heritage and Stabilization Fund Act. And as such, there is no requirement for the government to make deposits to the fund.
Next question, Senator Ma.
Yeah, question number 61 to the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. No broker was used in the procurement process of the galleon's passage. A subcommittee was appointed by Cabinet to identify a suitable passenger and vehicle ferry to service the inter-island sea bridge. During the process of identification of a suitable vessel, an offer for sale was received directly from the owners of the galleon's passage vessel, namely Sea Lease Limited. Since no broker was used, no fees were paid, and part 3 of the question is therefore not applicable.
Senator Ma.
Madam President, could the Minister indicate, since an offer of sale was made, could he indicate to us to whom that offer of sale was made?
Minister of Finance.
The Ministerial Committee received all the information with respect to available vessels.
Senator Ma.
Could the Honourable Minister indicate, having regard to the offer of sale and the role of the Interministerial Committee, what steps did the Ministry take or the ministerial team take to ensure that we were not buying cat in bag as it relates to this particular vessel? What steps would you have taken?
Minister of Finance.
Madam President, I believe I have answered that question more than once already in this Senate. But since Senator Mark's memory is deficient, I will remind him that I informed the Senate that a number of steps were taken to ensure that the vessel was fit for purpose and represented value for money, including sea trials, inspections by Lloyd's Register of Hong Kong, inspections by an engineering firm out of Australia called Schulte Marine, experts from the University of Trinidad and Tobago, which I mentioned recently in this Senate, who visited and attended the sea trials, and valuations done by 2 independent valuation companies, all of which confirmed the vessel was fit for purpose and value for money. And I've said this already twice.
Well, I want to make it very clear, unlike you, my memory is not efficient. Okay? And I want to ask you.
Senator Ma, no, please. No, just have a seat. Ask your questions through me, and there's no need for you to No, Senator Mark, please, just ask your supplemental question. You have two more. Senator Mark, please don't point at me. Please
I'm not
sit.
pointing at you.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are, Senator Mark. Please. Ask. You will always have my protection, but ask for it in the way that is consistent with the conventions of this Senate. Senator Mark, yes, you have two more questions.
I want to ask the distinguished Minister of Finance, through you, Madam President, whether he's aware that two members were recruited by his ministry or the government of TNT, David Brash and a fellow called Adrian Bihari. And they were sent and dispatched to that location in order to ensure that the vessel was suited for purpose. And therefore given the green light as a result. Is the minister aware of those names?
Minister of Finance.
Madam President, I can't use the word untruth in the Senate, but that is not true. That is a complete figment of the imagination of Senator Mark, a total untruth.
Madam President, is the minister prepared once evidence is produced to the effect that I have advanced to withdraw his statement?
Senator Mark, I won't allow that. Next question. Senator Haynes.
Why are you here? I'm not the minister answering questions.
Question.
You have something to hide.
Senator, please take your seat. Senator Mark, please let us continue in a dignified manner as we begin this sit-in, okay? Senator Haynes.
Question number.
Madam President, I seek your protection. You gentleman is saying that, why do I lie so? I take objection to that language.
Sorry, Senator Mark.
You didn't hear that?
I did not
hear
it.
Well, I heard it and I'm seeking your protection.
Yes, yes. Minister, could you please sit, Senator Mark? Minister, please. Yes. Senator Haynes.
75 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The state currently provides counseling support services for young children whose parents were murdered through the Victim and Witness Support Unit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Counseling has been provided to 236 children for the period October 2015 to December 2017. During the period October 2015 to December 2015, 28 children received counseling from the Victim and Witness Support Unit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. During the period which followed, that is January 2016 to December 2016, 91 children received counseling, and for the period January 2017 to December 2017, 117 children received counseling. The following information gives a breakdown of counseling provided per division. In respect of the Northern Division, 17 children received counseling for the entire period, meaning October 2015 to December 2017. For the Northeastern Division, and allow me, with your permission, Madam President, I'll offer even more details. So in the same periods, meaning October to December 2015, followed by the period January to December 2016, and the last period, January to December 2017, I'll give the figures. So in respect of the Northeastern Division, the figures are 8, 11, and 24, giving a total of 43. Relative to the Central Division, 0, 10, 25, with a total of 35 children. Eastern Division, 0, 5, 4, total being 9. Southern Division, 0, 14, 23, once more the total, 37 children. Southwestern Division 212, total being 5. Western Division 5819 with a total of 32. Port of Spain 103513 with a total of 58. Madam President, the total figures being 28 for all divisions, that is 91 and 117 in respect of the last period, January to December 2017, given an overall total of 236 children. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Can you state, Minister, is it a one-off service or are there multiple counseling sessions?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The government of Trinidad and Tobago takes seriously the welfare of its citizens, and accordingly, we offer these services on an ongoing basis. Thank you very much.
Next question, Senator Haynes.
Question number 76 to the Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the major landslip, which is one of the most critical unstable slope sites which exist in that area, is located at 7.5 kilometers mark of the North Coast Road. This has been posing serious maintenance challenges to the Highway Division over the last 5 years. Heavy rainfall, saturated slopes, the natural slope of the rock towards the roadway, it's composed to the constant weathering and the geotechnical composition plague the roadway with rock slides, slope failures, and blockage to part or even the entire roadway at times. The Highway Division, in an effort to keep the North Coast Road passable during the rainy season of 2017, cleared material and fallen trees from the roadway during the period July 2017 to December 2017. There were 2 major rock slides, 2 major rocks, and 5 landslips. These were dealt with in-house with utilizing the equipment and manpower from the Highways Division and some rental dump trucks and backhoes, as well as utilizing the services of bonded contractors who worked constantly to remove fill material to ensure that the road was opened to the community on a daily basis. Madam President, the solution is not one of quick fix because of the severity of the rock slides and the magnitude of the failure which occurred in December 2017. In moving forward, the Ministry of Works and Transport, with the help of experts from the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, conducted a preliminary review of the North Coast and its terrain and identified some of the major causes of the problem. The team found that there were 267 trees with potential of falling, some as old as 50 years. It is proposed that the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries be required to prune and cut and remove 267 trees. In order to improve the drainage channel in critical areas, construction of curb and slipper drains as well as proper drainage systems were proposed, and construction of 2 retaining walls is proposed to decrease the effects of surface runoff and erosion while improve slope stability and mitigation against future landslips. Additionally, the periodic maintenance of the roadway will be required to be maintained its level of stability and reduce the impact of vibration along the roadway and slopes. Dr. Derek Gay, a principal of Earth Investigation Systems Limited and lecturer of the geotechnical engineering at the University of the West Indies, has been engaged to conduct a geotechnical site assessment of the landslips and provide geotechnical engineering advice on a permanent solution. Once the report is received, the Highways Division will prepare a tender document to produce the service required to improve for a permanent solution. I thank you.
Senator Haynes.
Thank you for your response, Minister. You listed a number of activities. Would you be able to give me the timeline for some of these? So there were temporary activities, work coming from the Ministry of Agriculture, as well as the geotechnical advice. Can we get some timelines for these?
Minister.
Thank you. Madam President, all indications is that we are trying to have this work completed before the rainy season of 2018. Thank you.
Next question, Senator Haynes.
Question number 77 to the Minister of Health.
Minister of Health.
Again, many thanks, Madam President. The total cost incurred for implementing the Ready for the Road Keeping Our Culture Alive project was $63,967.76. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Senator Haynes.
Thank you for your response, Minister. Do you, I would just like to ask, this $63,967, does the Minister believe this was priority spending by the Minister of Health?
Senator won't allow that question. Okay. Next question.
Yeah, can I just... So, is it equitable distribution of spending, given that most of these entertainers may be able to afford this health service?
Senator Haynes, I won't allow that question. Senator Mark.
Look, he wants to answer.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, could the Minister indicate whether this particular exercise is going to be repeated on an annual basis? Madam President?
Oh God, Madam President.
Senator Mark, Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, this is just one of the exercises. For instance, we went to Corial and Mafeking recently to vaccinate people free against the influenza virus. We went to the Shiguanas market, the Tunapuna market. We went to the Sawa Promenade on Saturday. We did work with the media. These are all free preventative measures. We went to the mosques, churches, and mandirs to do preventative work, and we caught one young man who had appendicitis, who was then sent on an emergency basis, and we saved his life by doing these types of interventions. So yes, it is value for money. Yes, we plan to repeat it, because of those 150 entertainers, many were found to have problems which we are now treating preventatively, because if we had left it, they would present to the public sector and incur more costs to treat them afterwards. So the answer is yes, we plan to do these preventative measures for all citizens, whether in Corial, Mafeking, Sawa, Shogunas Market, Tunapuna Market, Arima Market, and everywhere. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Senator Haynes.
So just to clarify, Minister, you are saying that you would be providing executive medical services to all these citizens, because that's what the question asked. It was executive medical services.
We are providing executive services to 1.3 million people.
Oh, nice. That's good to know.
Madam President, could you advise this Honourable Senate, having invoked the relevant standing order, as it relates to question 13, could you bring us up to speed with what has been the response thus far?
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I forwarded the correspondence to the relevant minister at the time, who was, obviously it is known that the Prime Minister is acting as Minister of Public Admin, and he's ably assisted by the Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister. I haven't gotten any response as yet, but I promise the Senate that by next week, because Minister Young is abroad as we speak, I will be able to respond in a more definite manner.
Public Business, Government Business, Bills, second reading.
Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam President. I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Make Provision for the Maintenance of Public Safety and Order through Discouraging Membership of Criminal Gangs and the Suppression of Criminal Gang Activity and for other related matters be now read a second time. Madam President, sometimes I forget which house I'm sitting in, so I apologize in advance if I sometimes confuse the presiding officers. Madam President, there was a very famous movie that I found to be quite interesting some time ago called The Groundhog Day. It was an interesting movie where someone lived the same day over and over and over again, waking up every morning in his bed, destined to live the same day over. Because essentially, as the plot of the movie went, the soul that occupied that body had to learn a certain lesson before he could graduate out of that circular life of one day repeated over and over. I must confess that this anti-gang bill, the reintroduction of laws into the body of laws in Trinidad and Tobago to discourage gang membership and to treat with criminality, has felt like Groundhog Day. Madam Speaker, I say so, Madam President, I say so, really because I think it's safe to say that as I stand now in the Senate addressing this Honorable House, I think we all agree that we want any law and any law operationalized such as to assist with the scourge of criminality. Criminality has no boundary, Madam President. Criminality is something that has gripped this country for a very long time, and far too long have we wrestled seemingly almost against a tide that has caused too many of our citizens to retreat. We heard in the inaugural address yesterday of Her Excellency Paula May Weeks, not bringing her into the debate, the reflection of someone who now takes position in our society that no one is above the law and that no one is able to escape from some of the consequences of the scourges in our society. We're here, Madam President, to essentially balance rights. We're bringing forward legislation which interrupts entrenched rights in the Constitution, Section 4 rights, Section 5 rights. We're here to ask the Parliament to allow for detention of citizens, to allow for citizens to go through a process before they are brought promptly before a court. We are here to ask for the provision of the ability to search premises with or without warrant. We're here to ask for a continued detention cycle for persons suspected of engaging in gang-related activity or to be gang members. We're here to ask for the forfeiture of property as the bill proposes. We're here to ensure that the presumption of innocence and due process is treated with by way of an exceptional route in this bill. All of those are Section 4 and Section 5 rights. Be they contained in the definition section of the bill, be they contained in the detention provisions in Section 16, in the arrest and search provisions in Clause 16 and Clause 15, or in the forfeiture provisions in Clause 17 of the bill. But, Madam President, we're here to do that against the rights which other persons in our society enjoy. And in particular, I wish to put onto the record, insofar as there could ever be interrogation by any court into the constitutionality and proportionality of this bill, I wish to place on record that the preamble of our Constitution, and in particular the express rights set out in Section 4 of the Constitution, and in particular the right of the individual to life, liberty, security of the person, enjoyment of property, and the right not to be deprived thereof except by due process of law. Those are essentially the balancing rights now put. The public on the one hand, with the right to life and liberty, living in the state of oppression from gang activity as we see in our country. They have rights on the one hand constitutionally, and then of course we must recognize the individual rights of even those persons who are brought before the court and who are accused in the fashion that they are. Madam President, it's true that this bill, as it's set out before us, really sets out its proper purpose. Its legitimate aim is to be found in the very title of the bill: an act to make provision for the maintenance of public safety and order through discouraging membership of criminal gangs and the suppression of criminal gang activity. That, Madam President, is tied into the legitimate aim of this bill. Madam President, albeit that the explanatory notes don't form part of the record. It's important to note that our explanatory notes, for the purposes of a pepper and heart construction, do form legitimate basis, again, for the legitimate aim limb of proportionality. And I wish to put into that context that there has been, and it's stated at page 2 of the bill, and it's set here, permit me to read it into the record. And whereas there has been a rapid growth of criminal gang activity within the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and whereas criminal gang activity infringes on the rights and freedoms of individuals as enshrined under the Constitution. So, Madam President, we're here talking, as we seem to have been speaking for a very long while, about this balancing of rights. Madam President, Trinidad and Tobago saw the introduction of anti-gang legislation in the maneuvering of the last government, in a very commendable introduction of laws for which there was full bipartisan support. A bill was tabled into the Parliament by my predecessor, Attorney General Anand Ram Logan. A joint select committee was in fact established. That joint select committee comprised members of both houses of the Parliament, and there was unanimity in agreement in that joint select committee's work. Indeed, many members of the current 11th Republican Parliament sat in that 10th Republican Parliament and in fact participated in the production of the joint select committee's work product. That joint select committee work product is to be found in the records of this Parliament. Indeed, the paper has been laid. It is paper number 5, I believe, of 2011, part of the records of this Parliament. The records will reveal that there was a presentation done by the TTPS, Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, on criminal street gangs, which highlighted type, number, the categorization of offenses and activities against known gang members at the time in 2010. So said, the work went ahead, but it went ahead with a very important limb associated with anti-gang laws, and that was the debate and consideration of amendments to the Bail Act. Madam President, it's true to say that from 1994 straight up to 2010, there had been serious and significant amendments to the Bail Act. In particular, in the period 2006 to 2008, there were amendments to the Bail Act to treat with the denial of bail, the judicial ouster for consideration of bail, particularly as it's best known in the circumstance of anti-kidnapping, where if your trial had begun within a 120-day period, you would not be permitted to access a judicial officer for the consideration of bail. In 2010, the bail amendments were considered alongside the anti-gang amendments, and Trinidad and Tobago agreed that it would introduce no bail provisions in similar circumstances to that for anti-kidnapping, where if your trial had begun within 120 days, you would not be permitted the approach to judicial officer. Act number 10 of 2011, Act number 9 of 2011, being the Anti-Gang Act and the Bail Amendment Acts respectively, came into the body of laws in Trinidad and Tobago, and the Parliament, the Joint Select Committee, the PNM opposition, the UNC government agreed that those laws should form part of the Lex Corpus for a full 5 years, due to expire in 2016, August 2016. The 16th of August 2016 would be the day after the expiry. So we went to the 15th of August. Now, Madam Speaker, Madam President, it's true that the bail amendments which were considered in the period 1994 right up to 2015, because there were several of them that came after the introduction of the anti-gang legislation, there was a further narrowing. In particular, there was a very interesting experiment in the move away from 3 strikes to 2 strikes to 1 strike to charge matters under the Bail Act. Let me explain that. Under the Bail Act in 2015, the proposal that last came from the last government was, if you are on a charge and you appear before a magistrate with another charge, you will essentially find yourself with a restriction on the access to bail. In the election passage in 2015, we came upon the need to address the laws which were due to expire some 9 months after. 9 months was provided to the present government to conduct an analysis of the anti-gang legislation and the bail amendments. In fact, we were facing down what can, in my mind, have been expected quite some time before, which was a challenge to the constitutionality of the Bail Act, something I've said openly on many an occasion. Indeed, some of my learned colleagues present today participated in that, and I make no condemnation to that. Sometimes I do give a little peekong over it, but the fact is that the law is there to be tested, and there were tests in relation to the bail amendments afoot. But the records of the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, as it was merged, demonstrated that there was no analysis or work product or diligence that was applied in terms of anticipating the return to Parliament prior to August 15, 2016, when the sun would have set on the anti-gang laws and the bail amendment laws. As a result of which, we came to the Parliament, we asked for a 2-year extension to the anti-gang and bail amendments, and we came to the Parliament at the House of Representatives and asked, in the circumstance of a disclosure that there was no material in the archives of the Attorney General's office evidencing work on the part of my predecessor attorneys general, stating that forward, we came with the statistical evidence which was then available to us, which importantly included sworn testimonial evidence of the Acting Commissioner of Police, Mr. Stephen Williams, speaking to the origin and need and importance of anti-gang legislation. We produced that to the Parliament, but regrettably, the opposition in the House of Representatives stated, as it is open to them, that they would not support the continuation for a 2-year period further for the keeping of the laws to treat with anti-gang legislation and bail amendments. And so the sun set in August 2016 and anti-gang laws disappeared from the books of Trinidad and Tobago. The bail amendments cascaded backwards. The Bail Act now stands as the 1994 Act essentially, subject to certain amendments as to the right of appeal in 2005 in particular. But we've essentially taken a step back. There's no longer charge. There's no longer 2 strikes. We are back down to 3 strikes in respect of bail. And I heard mentioned in the public domain that the rationality for a 2-year sunset period is to be anchored in the government's proposal in 2016 that we further extend the life of the anti-gang legislation and the bail amendments by 2 years. And I wish to put a distinction on that point. And that is, at that point in time, in 2016, when we came to ask for the time to do the work that was not completed, that was then to allow us the opportunity to consider, in particular, whether we should in fact continue with the form of bail as existed under the bail amendments coming up to the 2015 amendments. We're comparing apples with oranges, most respectfully. Madam President, we took a step further. We then went to work. We listened to the observations of the opposition and members of the public. We listened to the exhortations and the pleas of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in particular that there is a need for anti-gang legislation. And permit me to say this. The impact and import of anti-gang legislation is rarely to be found in its power of disruption. The mere fact of being a gang member, the mere fact of being a gang leader, and remember, that is, as is contained in the definitions clause 4 of this bill, that is to be related to gang activity. You must be engaged in gang activity. It isn't correct to say that there is a strict liability, even though one can take that view, and I'll come to that in some observations of the Law Association in a moment. But the fact is that the disruptive power to gangs acting in the way that they do is an important takeaway from this bill. We went to work in relation to the anti-gang. We produced some very important operational markers along the way. In particular, the government recognized that the anti-gang unit, which was the feature of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service as it operated in the period prior to this government's tenure, was comprised of a very few members, In fact, it's public knowledge that 8 of those members, were put on charges for murder, and so the unit was significantly reduced in its capacity. We went to work in the formation of a new and improved arrangement at the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service by encouraging the Commissioner to so arrange affairs. We saw the merger of the Organized Crime Narcotics Bureau, the OCNFB, Firearms Bureau, and the CGIU, the Criminal Gang Investigation Unit, into a new entity referred to as the OCIU, which comprises 159 officers. We went to work, we analyzed the statistics, we took a reflective consideration of the legislation as it existed in other jurisdictions. We took a look at the 2011 Anti-Gang Law, Act number 10 of 2011. We took a look at the litigation prevailing against those things, and we came back to the Parliament again, asking in November 2017 for a reintroduction of anti-gang laws. Very importantly, Madam President, we did not ask for that anti-gang law to be articulated on the supporting leg of restrictions to bail. We did not. We left bail aside. We are, in fact, preparing legislation to treat with the bail as a standalone feature. In fact, the laws in Canada give very good reflective position on how bail ought to be treated, because there really ought not to be a difficulty in how one treats with bail, because Section 6 of the Bail Act is wide enough to be operationalized. The problem that we have is that the standards in the magistracy in particular vary in considerable measure one magistrate to the other, and therefore the harmonization of approach and whether one reverses the burden is the active consideration in the bail laws. But we came back to the Parliament in November 2017, and unfortunately we did not gain the 3/5 support by the opposition then. We engaged in a significant amount of consultation to get us to that position. We condescended to the analysis, and I don't mean that pejoratively. We went into the detailed analysis of the 2011 anti-gang laws versus the 2017 draft. And in fact, the draft, the Anti-Gang Bill 2018, which is before us right now, I will end in a short while in going through the clauses and demonstrating that we are in fact in very similar form, if not exactly, along the lines and prescriptions of the 2011 anti-gang laws. Madam President, we did, in our consultative exercise, engage a wide variety of stakeholders. I wish to put onto the record that the Office of the Attorney General wrote requesting comments by way of separate letters dated July 6, 2017 to the Judiciary and the Commissioner of Police and the Director of Public Prosecutions. We wrote by way of letters to the Law Association dated August 25, 2017 and November 10, 2017. And, as is now public record, we did not receive commentary from the Office of the DPP, nor did we receive commentary until last night, some 7 months later, from the Law Association. I wish to thank the President of the Law Association for actually responding to us. Their letter is now in the public domain. I expect it to feature prominently in the course of this debate. There are certain observations that they have made. I'm prepared to entertain some of the provisions that have been raised. There are distinguishing points of view onto that. It isn't the most tidy arrangement to have the Law Association take a whole 7 months to comment on 19 clauses, where the 19 clauses, 15 of them are a replication in large part of the law as it stood in 2011. But nonetheless, I express my gratitude to the members of the Law Association for finally delivering some commentary. Madam President, we engaged in an exercise with the Leader of the Opposition and the Office of the Opposition, and I wish to thank my learned colleague, Senator Ramdeen in particular, for engaging in the exercise that we did. It's well known that despite differences that we sometimes banter about between us, that I can think it safe to say that we are always unified in purpose as lawyers when we sit trying to come up with laws for the better operationality of Trinidad and Tobago. We went through an exercise, sometimes hard-pressed, where I looked at my learned colleagues opposite with smiles on their faces, trying to justify what was, in many senses, a bare political argument. because we really essentially came down in that exercise to what the length of a sunset clause ought to be. Because the law as substantially drafted, the 2018 bill, the 2017 bill, the 2016 bill, that groundhog cycle of bills really resembled Act number 10 of 2011 with some improvements. Thankfully, we are now at the position where we have a bill before this Honorable Senate, and the merit of the bill is to be considered with the knowledge that all that we do today, even with a 3/5 exception within the parameters of Section 13(2) of the Constitution, always makes us subject to challenge into the courts as to whether a bill such as this is essentially proportional, i.e., is it such that the democracy and rule of law in Trinidad and Tobago ought to support these kinds of intrusions into 3/5 rights, Sections 4 and 5 of the Constitution. Madam President, we have taken note that the bill is required to articulate against a proper operational structure. Obviously, this bill articulates on capacity issues at the Director of Public Prosecutions, which I'll address in my winding up. Obviously, this bill is intended to articulate with the concept of witness protection and the Justice Protection Program, because you can have no prosecution without evidence, you can have no evidence without witnesses. Obviously, this bill depends upon the intelligence capabilities of the TTPS and law enforcement agencies and making sure that you have evidence to act. And obviously, some of this is going to depend upon how the courts interpret the very definitions that we consider in Clause 4 of the bill, in particular with respect to gang member, or gang activity. Madam President, would you remind me the precise time that I end in 45 minutes, please? Sorry, 20 minutes past?
17.
17 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, in terms of anchoring the legitimacy of this bill, it's imperative that we reflect upon the actual position in Trinidad and Tobago. We, Madam President, have a position where in 2014, the Acting Commissioner, Stephen Williams, presented very important information to the country. Much of that was actually set out in an affidavit filed by the Honourable Commissioner in High Court proceedings, which were filed, in fact, on May 17, 2016. And permit me to put on record a few things which come out of the affidavit evidence of the Acting Commissioner of Police, Commissioner Williams. He says this, and permit me to quote, "Over the last 15 years, Trinidad and Tobago has experienced the development and operationalization of gangs. Their origin is found not only in the commission of criminal activity, but in the need of some persons, especially youth in high-risk areas, to have some sense of belonging. Gangs pose a particular threat because of their organized structure and their potential for expansion with the recruitment of new members. Gang-related activity has permeated almost every sphere of criminal activity, with a particular propensity for engaging and committing the more violent and serious offenses such as murders, kidnappings, and the trafficking of narcotics. Firearms are more likely than not to be used in the commission of these offenses. Surveillance by the Criminal Gang Investigation Unit has revealed that working allegiances have been formed amongst gangs to facilitate drugs and arms trafficking." He goes on to say, as of 2014, 92 known gangs were identified as operating throughout the 9 geographical divisions of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, with an estimated 1,500 in gang membership. He says, whereas in 2014, the highest concentration of gangs was located within Port of Spain and Northern divisions, in 2016, the Southern division has seen the largest increase in gang activity. Madam President, the government, in conducting its exercise of providing statistics to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, went a step further. Following upon the activities and the garrison-type behavior that we witnessed in the Beetham estate in October 2017, we revealed that in Trinidad and Tobago, the new organization, the OCIU, treating with gang activity, had actually completed their surveillance and analysis of gang activity. And as at the 29th of November 2017, the figures produced and stand now, then, as a total number of gangs being 211, with a total gang membership of 2,459. Northeastern Division, 15 gangs, 256 members. Port of Spain Division, 41 gangs, 574 members. Central Division, 10 gangs, approximately 106 members. Southern Division, 19 gangs, 202 members. Eastern Division, 9 gangs, 121 members. Northern Division, 25 gangs, 365 members. Southwestern Division, 21 gangs, 178 members. Western Division, 49 gangs, 525 members. And Tobago, 24 gangs with 190 members. If we take the year-on-year comparison between 2014, 2016, 2017, the number of gangs in 2014 therefore moved from 92 in December 2016 to 179, in July 2017 to 211. That's a 129% increase over 2014. The number of gang members, 2014, 1,500. December 2016, 2,038. July 2017, 2,459. That's a 63% increase on 2014. Highest incidents per police division, that's of gangs, Northern Division. December it became Western Division with 46 gangs and Port of Spain 31. Western again in July 2017 and Port of Spain, with Port of Spain still being the large central operation. Gang-related murders taken out of the total number of murders that we've seen stood at 35% of murders. Gang-related murders at 35%, and that does not include woundings or shootings or possession of firearm, which may broaden the pot. Because remember, a murder is often, when conducted with a firearm, a shooting gone wrong or gone right, depending upon the way that you look at it. Madam President, we've looked since 7th of December 2017, just a small period when the bill collapsed for lack of support in the House of Representatives. The number of murders for the period 8th December to 6 March 2018 was 131. The TTPS has indicated that the number of gang-related murders for the same period was 39. Again, that's 30%. And that does not include the shootings and woundings or assault or possession matters. So, Madam President, the fact is, statistically, Trinidad and Tobago is wrestling with a gang culture. Statistically, we are watching garrison-type behavior across the country. We're watching people emboldened to go onto the streets of Trinidad and Tobago and resist the police. But this phenomenon and culture has gone even further. We're watching school children behave in a particular way, which resembles a form of criminality or a form of objection. Our school children. In my day at Presentation College, San Fernando, you got in trouble if your socks were the wrong color or you didn't have a handkerchief in your pocket. They made sure, your teachers, to insist that you had to have a handkerchief in your pocket, as I still do, and a reading pen in your pocket, as I still do. As Mr. Mercier, when he walked into the class and asked for production of those two items, you were bound to produce them. To this day, umpteen years later, I am still every morning looking for my handkerchief and reading pen from the kind of upbringing that we had at school, which ensured that there was discipline and work. God rest his soul, he passed away. And we remember him fondly as someone that formed our personalities. Both Senator Rambarat and I were taught by him. And Senator Obika. And Senator Lehunt, it seems, many of us. So, Madam President, the point is, we are watching a phenomenon in our society which causes concern. And therefore, we come to the provisions of this bill. We accept that there's statistical position, but Madam President, we accept that we're not the first country in the world, we're not the first jurisdiction in this world to treat with the phenomenon of gangs. Indeed, from a surgeon of the laws passing through the United States of America, passing through the federal law system, the individual state law system, passing through the Commonwealth, passing through the Caribbean Commonwealth jurisdictions, Jamaica in particular. Countries have experimented with anti-gang laws, and Jamaica more so amongst the rest quite successfully. So we come to this bill, Madam President, and in the bill, we're being asked to consider some certain improvements. And permit me to put on the record in the couple of minutes that I have that the Anti-Gang 2011 law and the Anti-Gang bill which we have before us provide for useful comparison. And permit me, because that law is well known. Let me start by saying our courts in Trinidad and Tobago have considered the anti-gang legislation. In particular, the dicta of Mr. Justice Nolan Barrow, Justice of Appeal, in the Kevin Stewart matter, provides for a very excellent example as to judicial analysis that anti-gang cases are not slam dunks, as he put it quite simply, that it requires evidence, but that it is not an impossibility. No court in the 33 matters which stand at the magistracy right now has poured scorn on the anti-gang law. No court for the entire time since 2011, August 21st, 2011, to now has poured scorn. We have been tested coming out of the state of emergency arrests with the 263 odd arrests and more that were sent by way of releases. We've been tested with false imprisonment and malicious prosecution. But dare I say that the mere fact that this false imprisonment and malicious prosecution brought against arrests under the anti-gang legislation demonstrates that there is recourse in that due process cycle for people who are wronged, arrested, taken into detention. Under the old law, you were denied bail, full stop. Under this law, we don't propose the denial of bail. Madam President, the short title, the proclamation clause, and the inconsistency provisions in clauses 1, 2, and 3 are the same. We get to clause 4 of the bill. Clause 4 of the bill, we have modified and revised the definition of gang, gang leader, gang member, gang-related activity, and importantly, we've included the perimeters of schools to include orphanages and 500 meters within recreational grounds, etc. That's because in this bill, we propose to treat with the phenomenon of recruiting children into gang membership or harboring and concealing. We have removed the definition of bulletproof vest, as we didn't need to treat with that. And we've added in prohibited weapons because that was unfortunately not included in the original Anti-Gang Act. Gang membership, which was the old clause 5 of the 2011 Act, we've disaggregated and made it, in terms of clarity, a better purpose. We provided a new clause 5, which treats squarely with evidence in relation to gangs, and a new clause 6, which treats with gang membership. We thought it better to model ourselves after the Jamaican Section 6.3 Criminal Justice Suppression of Criminal Organizations Act 2014 in treating with evidence separately from gang membership. And very importantly, we have sought to clarify the utilization of the term gang leader. We're providing, therefore, clarity to the judiciary in separating out the evidential issues in Clause 5, the new Clause 5, from the gang membership considerations. What constitutes gang membership? The fact that you don't need to have an insignia or use certain signs, etc. But there are other things which the court ought to pay attention to, such as admissions, such as publications, such as activities, etc. Madam President, we've also allowed for the coverage of intelligence agencies into these provisions to provide form of protection for persons engaged in intelligence activities. In Clause 6 of the bill, in Clause 7 of the bill, we find ourselves in similar terms to what was Section 6 of the Anti-Gang 2011 Act. Again, we've used the term gang leader here to provide clarity so that persons are caught under that particular section. It is the coercing or encouraging gang membership section. And we thought it important because of the pressure of communities to treat with coercion into gangs and gang membership. Similarly, in the new Clause 10, we're dealing with a very important provision which treats with the prevention of gang members from leaving a gang. Because there is a social pressure in our communities where garrison-type behavior is dealt with by way of a direct intimidation of persons who just don't want to be members of gangs or coerced into gang activity. And that's in similar terms to Section 7 of the 2011 Act. In Clause 9, we're treating with the counseling of a gang. That is in similar terms to Section 8 of the Anti-Gang 2011 law, which is participation in criminal activity in association with a gang. What we have done is to insert that persons who provide background support to gangs, that they would be in the aiding and abetting scenario, so that we can treat with the people who are hiding behind the gang members conducting their activities whilst promoting them by paying for activities or putting them out to perform, quote-unquote, the work, to do the job for the person. In the new Clause 11, we're treating with the possession of bulletproof vests, firearms, ammunition, prohibited weapons. And we are saying, in comparison to the Section 9 of the Anti-Gang 2011, we remove the words intends to use, we remove prohibited weapons, and the rationale for removing these is that we're only intending to catch actual use. The section was too open to mischief, and therefore we had to cut down the section. Prohibited weapons were included because prohibited weapons was something that were left out from the firearms consideration, and it was an omission that should not have happened. Clauses 12 and 13 of the bill were anchored previously in Section 10 of the Anti-Gang 2011 Act. What we did was to split out in Clause 12, harboring a gang member, and we took it away from concealing a gang member. But what we did was, in this version of the bill, we expressly provided for protections in the form of defenses. We expressly provided a defense in a form of reversal of proof, where it is for the person against whom harboring or concealing is raised to treat with the proof that he did not know or have reasonable knowledge that the person was either harboring or concealing a gang member or a gang leader. And in particular, we treat with the phenomenon of children, because we put in and we repeated the same exceptions where a person in loco parentis, a person who was acting in the role of the parent of the child, a person who was actually the parent of the child, or a person with responsibility for the child, may have taken in the child to try and lead the child away from the gang activity. Madam President, in the House, we noticed, it's something that we had not picked up before, but on the sitting at the House just last week, we noticed that there was an unfortunate inclusion that any law enforcement authority, which would have included people other than the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, could have asked a question and somebody would have found themselves in the harboring and concealing provisions guilty of an offense for not providing the information. But respectfully, the TTDF and other agencies, apart from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, had no role in that, and so we narrowed it down to just the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Madam President, in the new Clause 14, recruiting a gang member, it's similar to Section 11, recruiting gang members of the Anti-Gang 2011 Act. We introduced higher penalties. We sought to make the offenses triable either way in certain circumstances, summary or indictable. And specifically, we redrafted it to ensure that persons can be charged with recruiting a child, because there is a phenomenon having established carefully in our country now that a child is anyone who's under 18 years of age, as Clause 4 of the bill provides. We've made sure to treat with the phenomenon of children. Again, we've dealt with a shifting of the burden of proof, and we've thought that that is a responsible point because it provides measure and due process to the scenario. Madam President, we, in the new Clause 15, have dealt with similarity to Section 12. That is the section which deals with police powers of entry, search, and arrest. And I should say, as we go to the new Clause 16, which deals with detention of persons, which would have been a similar provision to Section 11 of the Act.
You have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. That it is Clause 15 and Clause 16 which the Law Association has reflected upon. They have raised issue as to the standards that we use, reasonable suspicion versus reasonable cause. They are asking for a harmonization of position. They are asking for clarity in some of the purposes. I don't necessarily agree with the entire submission that they've made, but I'm confident that it will be ventilated on the floor by other members to address the Honourable Chamber, and our members will respond, and in the wrap-up I will give a more fulsome explanation of the points of view. But suffice it to say, in the warranting section, we are taking avail of the common law, we're taking avail of the Criminal Act, we're taking avail as well of the Anti-Gang Act as it stood. You can enter in warranted and unwarranted provisions for searches. If you're going into a dwelling house, it must be with a warrant. In the detention provisions that we treat with in the new clause 16, specifically, we have moved to a higher standard. We are allowing any police officer to detain for 72 hours. You must keep a record of the detention. But if you want to continue investigations, you must approach a higher judicial officer, go to a court and say, I wish to continue with detention, and have the court be satisfied. Now, the Law Association has raised concern about the practice of the magistrate in the warranting section just being satisfied with the say-so of the policeman. But, of course, the highest courts of the land have said that those would be illegal, and therefore the common law itself and judicial practice has grown up to guide what is proper in those circumstances or not. So I think there's adequate protection. But suffice it to say, in the detention, we have moved for a significant amount of due process by having a judge consider further detention. We, Madam President, have kept the forfeiture provisions in Clause 17 of the bill, which is a replication of Clause 14 of the bill. If your property has been turned out to be property used for gang activity, you will forfeit it after conviction. And that is something which says that you ought not to profit. Clause 19 we treat with the sunset clause. There was active debate as to whether 2.5 years, 2 years, 4 years. We've settled upon 30 months, which is 2.5 years, and that is for consideration before the honourable members. Madam President, Clause 18 of the bill treats with the amendment of the schedules. One, if you're going to amend the schedule, which is Schedule 1, which sets out the offences, you have to come to Parliament to do that. But number 2, the form, we've allowed for the Minister to amend from time to time by order, because that's more of an administrative act. I should add that the Law Association has added, and we are considering the introduction of upon oath into that further detention form, so that there is sworn testimony, with therefore sanction in the event that you've got it wrong, and that is something that we're considering. The first schedule treats with the prescription of offences. The Law Association has asked us to remove some of the anti-gang offences from that. I don't necessarily agree with that. We have kept to the formula of the 2011. Madam President, this law is proportionate. This law is necessary. The impact of this law is to be found in the need to disrupt gang activity. This law is not about a perfect piece of law. This law is not about finding the absolute panacea to treat with crime. This law is about giving a fighting chance for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This law is not grounded to be articulated with an ouster of judicial consideration for bail, as the 2011 law was. There is due process provision. There is access to the court on every opportunity. And this is something that I commend genuinely to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago through this Honourable Senate for consideration. I look forward to the contributions of honourable members, and I beg to move.
Honourable Senators, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Make Provision for the Maintenance of Public Safety and Order through Discouraging Membership of Criminal Gangs and the Suppression of Criminal Gang Activity and Other Related Matters be now read a second time. Senator Ramdeen.
Thank you, Madam President. It is indeed a pleasure to be given the opportunity in this debate to reply to the Attorney General on a bill that seeks to make provision for the maintenance of public safety and order through discouraging membership of criminal gangs and the suppression of criminal gang activity and for other related matters. Having heard my learned friend, the Attorney General, Madam President, who, as he always does in a very succinct and eloquent way, describe what the provisions of this Act are meant to do, I was just a bit disappointed in one particular aspect of the Attorney General's contribution, which is that I thought the Attorney General would have outlined exactly how we find ourselves here today in debating this particular piece of legislation. And I want to pillar that upon a statement that was made by Her Excellency in her speech yesterday to all of us as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, which is that we should find the light in everything that we do. A very powerful message to each and every citizen of this country. And I want to say that it is as a result of the light and the wisdom of the leader of the opposition that we find ourselves in this position today, being able to debate this piece of legislation, Madam President. Because the government brought this piece of legislation in early December last year. And for whatever reason, the legislation did not get the constitutional support that it required for its passage. And as a country, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the government had indicated, was asking for this legislation. As a parliament, we found ourselves in a position where we could not reach agreement as to how we could find a bipartisan mechanism for the passage of this particular piece of legislation. And while the government, after the bill was defeated in the other place, was prepared, and not the Attorney General, the leader of the government was prepared to lay the blame at the feet of the opposition and say it was blood on the hands of the opposition. The opposition leader was prepared to put the safety and security of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago first and find a way to bring this legislation back to the Parliament. And that is not something that should go without mention, Madam President, because when the bill was defeated, there was a degree of disappointment across the country in different quarters. And many persons were saying that it would take 6 months before we could the Parliament could review the bill and bring it back. And that was really not the case. It was actually, we would have had to wait until September, a new parliamentary session, to start this debate all over again. And it was by the request and the invitation of the leader of the opposition that the government was asked, with the agreement of the leader of the opposition, to invoke the standing orders 122 and 126, so that with the consent of the government and the opposition, we had a united approach to bring this piece of legislation back to the Parliament of this country, so that we could be here today debating it, putting in place anti-gang legislation, and I say so without apology, due to the efforts of the opposition, holding firm to the position that we have always said. We are prepared to support good legislation that strikes the right balance between the citizen and the state and protects the constitutional rights of the citizens. And the Attorney General went, Madam President, straight to the fundamental rights provisions, because this is a piece of legislation on the face of it that breaches the fundamental rights, but in a proportionate way that pursues a legitimate aim that, as the law presently stands, would pass the constitutional test and the constitutional requirements of Section 13 of the Constitution. But while the government has brought this piece of legislation, Madam President, it is important for us to understand where we are today as a country with respect to the safety and security of our citizens. Because this is a piece of legislation that the government tells us is going to help us fight the criminal element and somehow win the war against the criminal element in this country. And where we are is a place that we've never been before. Because as we speak today, the Attorney General was quite right. Since this year has started, we have had an unprecedented number of murders in this country of 131 as we speak today. 131. We're in the middle of March, and we are at 131. The government, in all its efforts to fight crime, has spent, budgeted over $22 billion on national security. So there can be no complaint about a lack of resources when it comes to national security and the fight against crime. But every piece of legislation that we pass here, Madam President, or that we debate here, that the government has presented to us in the fight against crime, and the whole of government approach as the government describes it, has told us this is going to assist. We've been hearing that for 30 months, that as we pass each piece of legislation, it is going to assist. The truth about it, Madam President, is that thus far, the citizens of this country have not gotten that assistance that has been promised to them for the past 30 months and before. Because there have been over 1,200 murders in the last 30 months. The Attorney General gave us the figures and said 35% of them have been gang-related. Well, that is simply not good enough, Madam President. And the most that the Attorney General can do is bring legislation. When we pass this legislation, as I will go through the figures and show you, there is a duty upon law enforcement to operationalize it. And as we pass pieces of legislation, act after act, and debate bill after bill, the truth about it is, in the last 30 months, we've really gotten no results, or very little. Because as we debate this piece of legislation today, Madam President, whichever side we sit on, the one thing I think we can agree upon is that the people of our country, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, are more unsafe now than they have been at any other point in time in the history of our country. And we have to ask why. Madam President, the Attorney General made reference about when he was in Presentation College. I can make reference to when I was in Naprima College. The mere fact of what we saw happen on High Street a week ago was unthinkable when we were back in school. That at 1 o'clock in the day, you will have people walk into a business place on High Street, smash the glass cases, and take up jewelry that belongs to someone else. And you have the San Fernando Police Station, a stone throw away on Harris Promenade. And that begs the question, are we really giving any comfort, safety, security, or guarantee to the people of our country by passing legislation? It's the best that we can do, but at the end of the day, are we getting any results for it? After we've spent over $22 billion on national security, what do we have to show for it? And yes, this is one piece of legislation where the government and the opposition have worked together. At the very outset, the Attorney General in the first debate in the other place indicated what he indicated to us today, that he had written to the Law Association, he had written to the Director of Public Prosecution, and he had received no reply. And like him, I would like to thank the President of the Law Association for providing a reply, albeit late, because having studied it last night, which I will also go through in part of my contribution, Madam President, I think that there are some useful suggestions that have been made by the Law Association that can strengthen the legislation. But, Madam President, the truth is, the phenomena of gangs that the Attorney General has referred to, that plagues our country today, did not start in 2015, it didn't start in 2010. It has been there for some time. And what we are grappling with today is not a problem that has mushroomed overnight. It is a serious problem that we have been grappling with for years. But like I've said before, between the period 1995 to 2000, we had one of the most brutal and brutish gangs that this country has ever experienced. It was called the Dole Chedi Gang. And Dole Chedi, during that period of time, and in his criminal trial, the evidence came out, he was referred to as the gangland boss. Between 1995 and 2000, under a UNC administration and a very, very good Attorney General, that gang was put to an end. They were charged, they were prosecuted, and they were executed without any anti-gang legislation. And you know, there is a lesson to be learned from that, Madam President. The lesson to be learned from that is this. Legislation, yes, we need the legislation. Yes, the legislation provides an additional tool to law enforcement. It provides an additional mechanism by which people can be brought before the courts for committing criminal activity. But at the end of the day, if law enforcement does not have the will, the courage, or the commitment and dedication to operationalize this piece of legislation, we are going to get nowhere. We are going to get absolutely nowhere. And let me just take the Attorney General's point about disruption, because the Attorney General did refer to the affidavit of the Acting Commissioner of Police, Mr. Stephen Williams, filed in CV 2016-00074. And in that affidavit, the Attorney General went through the figures, which I will not repeat, but only to say, Madam President, between 2012, 2011, and 2016, we had anti-gang legislation in this country, passed and operationalized. But what the figures show is that there was really little disruption. Even though we had the legislation in place, even though the police had the mechanism, the same 15 sections that the Attorney General talks about, we had an anti-gang unit. The Attorney General tells you where they are now. But the point about it is the disruption argument holds very little weight, because the figures show that between 2014 and 2017, there was a 129% increase in the number of gangs we had in the country. So if we are going to say that this piece of legislation is going to provide some kind of deterrence to people forming gangs or forming themselves into gangs, the statistics don't support that. In terms of membership, the Attorney General quoted the figures. Between 2014 and 2017, the figures went from 1,500, Madam President, to 2,459, a 63% increase in the number of persons who have joined criminal gangs. And in the other place, when the debate was proceeding in what I could call the first rounds, the Honourable Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister and in the Ministry of the Attorney General, in answering a request for the statistics about murders that have been linked to gang activity, provided, and what I'm reading from, Madam President, is the Hansard of the 6th of December 2017 and the contribution of the Honourable Minister Stuart Young. And this is what he had to say. Gang-related murders for the period 2010 to 2017 started at 75 in 2010, up to 93 in 2011. There was a state of emergency, he says. In 2012, it jumped from 93 to 144 gang-related murders. In 2013, it went up to 197 gang-related murders. The highest ever level of gang-related murders took place in 2013. In 2014, it went up to 142. In 2015, 141. It dropped in 2016. So, Madam President, the figures, the objective figures that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service provides to us has shown that when the legislation was in place, the number of gang-related murders increased exponentially. So that to say, and it's not a criticism, but to say that the legislation of its own is going to provide some kind of disruptive or deterrent effect on persons who are intent on committing criminal activity, all I want to say to that is that the statistics that we have, which is all that we can go on, does not support that proposition. And therefore it begs the question, in addition to the legislation, what is it that we need to do in order to get this right? Because the only thing that we can say is that whatever has been done before hasn't gotten it right. We've gotten it quite wrong. That's why we find ourselves in the position that we find ourselves in today. And, Madam President, the reason why I respectfully would submit to this Senate that we find ourselves in this position is because the gang culture and the gangs are more attractive to our young, disenfranchised youth. And that is why, when you look at the ages of persons who find themselves in these gangs, you find that they really comprise the young, disenfranchised youth. And that is why, Madam President, in addition to the passage of legislation, we have to understand what is it that we must do in order to come to a position where we can really fight this disease called gang activity. And if I can suggest to the government, it cannot be a legislative approach alone. And to tackle the issue of gang activity, criminality, and where our youths find themselves in 2018, as a government, between 2010 and 2015, that was one of the major things that was focused on, both almost in every different ministry. There was a whole, if I can borrow the words of the Attorney General, a whole of government approach with different ministries to treat with the disenfranchised youth. And let me just put on the record, Madam President, that in addition to the legislation that was in place, the People's Partnership during 2010 and 2015 brought serious crime down to the lowest in 33 years. And it was not simply, the point I'm getting at, Madam President, is that it was not simply legislation that did that. When it came to tackling the disenfranchised youth, this is what we did. There were social programs which currently existed to help empower young citizens to reach their fullest potential. And these were the opportunities that we gave to them. Higher education loan program, the MIC craft programs, the Helping Youth Prepare for Employment, HYPE, Life Skills Unit, the Multi-Sector Skills Training Program, commonly called MUST, the On-the-Job Training Program, the OJT, Serval, Advanced Skills Training Program. So, Madam President, the point about it is that we empowered our youth, gave them opportunities that would move them away from seeing that gang activity as being something attractive to them. But that alone was not enough. What we did, in addition to legislation, Madam President, we trained 2,000 Special Reserve Police officers. We gave the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service a non-taxable special allowance of $1,000. Madam President, we launched a community comfort patrol. And one thing that is very important, Madam President, and very unfortunate that we find ourselves in today, is this. With respect to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, we increased their fleet of vehicles by more than 500 vehicles. Those were 500 that were purchased, but we refurbished over 11,000 vehicles for the protective services. Now, Madam President, the truth is that the passage of legislation alone cannot help. It simply will not work. And that is why in the consultations between the government and the opposition on this piece of legislation, we asked the government in that meeting where members of the opposition met with members of the government, that what guarantees can they give to us, but not more importantly us, what guarantees can they give to the citizens of the country that we will get the other things right? Madam President, it is of no joy to look in the daily newspaper, and I want to refer to an article, Sunday, February 4th, 2018. That's last month, Madam President, where police, the headline of the article is, police work hampered by lack of vehicles. And in this article, Madam President, I don't want to quote it and read it, but the gist of this article is that the Arima Business Chamber is raising funds to repair police vehicles, derelict police vehicles in Arima. Because as we speak, the work this is what the article says, the work of police officers from 12 stations in the Northern Division is being hampered due to limited vehicles. Over a dozen vehicles need to be repaired. We can't be satisfied, Madam President, that as a parliament, we come here, we sit, we'll pass this legislation today. The government will get opposition support in a bill where they ask for a constitutional majority. And at the end of the day, we find ourselves where in Arima, the business chamber is raising $8,000 to fix 2 vehicles, Madam President. How could that ever be right? When we have a budget, the government has told us time and time again, we must get more from less. We don't have the kind of resources we had before. But you've spent $22 billion in national security, and you can't get $8,000 to fix vehicles at Arima? That can't be right. How are we going to operationalize the anti-gang legislation when somebody calls into a police station with information about gang-related activity, about gang members in their community, and there are no vehicles to go to investigate the complaints? How are we going to do that? Where are we going to get when we pass this legislation? And that takes me to another article, Madam President, almost the same subject, written 2 weeks later on the 25th of February, 2018. And I want to implore the Attorney General today. It's a matter that I raised a week ago, Attorney General. It is this. The headline of this is, Arima businessmen want license for guns.
Senator Ramdeen, where are you quoting it from?
I'm sorry, my lady. I apologize. This is an article written by Rhonda Dowlat from the Sunday Guardian, 25th of February, 2018. The article headline is, Arima businessmen want license for guns. And the complaint that is raised in this article, Madam President, is this. The president of the Arima Business Association, Rival Chattergun, raised the issue in the face of escalating crime, not only in Arima, but throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And this was when the murder toll was 73 in the 25th. Madam President, we are in March, second week, third week. We're at 131. Meanwhile, on February 20th, an Arima businessman was shot during a robbery and is still fighting for his life as he remains warded in critical condition at the hospital. This is the important part, Madam President. Chattergun said this situation in the country has become grave as thousands of illegal firearms, many used in gang activity, are being brought into Trinidad and Tobago on a daily basis and are being used by criminals, while legitimate business operators and other citizens remain vulnerable. And this is the quote he says, imagine the frustration of legitimate citizens applying for a firearm user's license more than 6 years ago, not receiving an acknowledgement or response, and continuing to live in fear 6 years later at a time when criminality has escalated. Madam President, I implore the Attorney General to take some kind of legislative step. If it is that the Office of the Commissioner of Police is overwhelmed with the criminality that they have to look after every day in the 12 divisions throughout the country, then let's take it and put it somewhere else. But, Madam President, it cannot be, as the Attorney General said last week, guns are coming into this country in containers at the port. While we concentrate on what is happening on our borders, it's coming in illegally in our port before our eyes. Gangs and criminals are arming themselves. And as we saw a week ago, Madam President, at 1 o'clock in the day in San Fernando, a security guard is pushed on the ground, faced with a gun butt at his head, while a store is being robbed. And the people who own that store, the legitimate businessmen who go to their businesses every single day and take all the steps that they can, are waiting 6 years to get a firearm. That's just not good enough, Madam President. It's not good enough. We have to do better than that. Madam President, that takes me to one more point with respect to the resources. We have a habit in this country of judging our success in crime fighting against the murder rate throughout the country. And if that is the test that we use, there is clearly a great failing on the part of the government with respect to the provision of safety and security. Because the one thing that must be very clear from the contribution of the Attorney General, Madam President, is that the rights that are guaranteed in the Constitution to each and every citizen of this country, the right to life, the right to property, and the security of the person, is a right that is guaranteed by the state. And when one looks at what has happened to our country and where we are today, it is clear that the state has failed the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Because the right to life, safety, and security is clearly a right that is not being guaranteed to the citizens of our country. And whereas the anti-gang legislation will go some way to providing a mechanism, a tool to the police and law enforcement to assist in guaranteeing us our safety and security, from the record over the past 30 months, we've been failing miserably. Madam President, going back to the issue about, because the number one, and I just link it back to the bill, because the number one scheduled offense in the schedule to the anti-gang legislation, possession of imitation firearms, larceny, arson, gang membership, receive number 15, murder. Madam President, in an article published on Sunday, January 28, 2018, the head of the homicide unit in Trinidad and Tobago, ACP Anthony James, gave an interview about what is the position with respect to the homicide unit. And just to take two items that Mr. James referred to. He said that the homicide unit needed proper training, equipment. They needed to up their game, to use his words. But the most important fact or revelation that was revealed by Mr. James is this. The most serious crime in our country today that plagues our country is murder. The department of the TTPS that has to deal with that is the homicide unit. We've spent $22 billion on national security. $22 billion. And the homicide division is operating at 200 staff when the sanction strength is 400. So how can we really be serious about the fight against crime and criminality when the most important unit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is operating at half the number of staff that they are required? And that's just one. The Attorney General made the point, and I will say so today, Madam President. The one murder that shocked most people in this country at the beginning of this year was Joshua Andrews, the 14-year-old who was killed in Trumakak. And when that murder took place, the Prime Minister said it was blood on UNC hands, and UNC had to be held responsible for that. While the leader of the opposition was writing back and forth to the Honorable Attorney General, trying to get a meeting to pass this piece of legislation, the Prime Minister was pointing at the opposition and saying, that is your fault. Well, let me tell you where the fault lies, Madam President. The Attorney General knows, because I met with him confidentially and gave him information in relation to that particular murder, that the person who has the evidence to prosecute that crime is not able to go to the police because the police cannot provide him with any protection as we speak today. So Joshua Andrews, God bless his soul, may he rest in peace, but his mother and father and other 9 siblings will get no justice. Because as we speak today, even when we pass this legislation and it gets assent and is proclaimed, it's going to bring no solace to them. Because at the end of the day, without a proper witness protection program, not only put into statutory form under the Justice Protection Act, that is just not good enough. Unless we resource the witness protection program, we are not going to get anywhere. Madam President, it was because we had a well-resourced witness protection program that Levi Morris was able to turn state witness, go into the box, give evidence, prosecute people, convict them, execute them. That is how you win the fight against the criminal element. And as we speak today, the same case that the Attorney General spoke about, with those 8 officers who are sitting in the remand yard now, the witness in that matter, another police officer, who has voluntarily put herself and her child into the witness protection program, needs the help of the attorney.
No, continue.
So, Madam President, let me move on from that now to what I say. I want to again thank the President of the Law Association, Mr. Douglas Mendez, Senior Counsel, who has provided the Attorney General on the 19th of March 2018 with certain suggestions that I have read through very carefully, Madam President, and they deal, if I can summarize them, they deal with the manner in which gang activity, gang member, and gang leader is defined. And in the views of the Law Association, they take the view that the definitions leads to a degree of circularity with respect to how you prove the offenses. I am sure that the Attorney General will study that suggestion that they've made, and we can come up in the committee stage with some form of formula that would help us. The Attorney General, the Law Association raises the issue about strict liability. And having gone through the legislation, Attorney General, perhaps I can suggest that to deal with the issues that have, the concerns that have been raised by the Law Association with respect to the absence of mens rea in some of the offenses that have been created by this legislation, we can perhaps insert what you have similarly as clause 13.4 to the legislation that deals with concealing a gang member. If we can craft a provision similar to that, we might be able to overcome that concern. I think that there is merit in the suggestion as to the different burdens that have to be satisfied by an arresting officer under Section 16.1 and the burden that has to be satisfied by someone who seeks to detain beyond the 72 hours. But I am respectfully of the view that that is a matter that could be cured very easily by virtue of a simple amendment to either of the provisions to bring the burdens in line. Obviously, Attorney General, you would see the merit in finding that an officer who arrests has a higher burden to satisfy than someone who has to detain. Madam President, there are a number of suggestions that have been made, which I would implore the Attorney General for us to find a way before this debate has ended, for us to be able to put right what the suggestions of the Law Association are. But while one can lay some degree of criticism, Madam President, at the alacrity with which the Law Association has responded to the Attorney General, and I myself have raised that matter with the President of the Law Association and other pieces of legislation, one of the things that the opposition had said in meeting and consulting with the government was that, not to use the words of the Attorney General, to have analysis paralysis over and over again, but there are certain stakeholders that are clearly more important than others in the passage of certain pieces of legislation. And we didn't want to hold island-wide debates, Madam President. What we were saying was that the Law Association has a statutory duty under the Legal Profession Act to guide this country in legal matters. They may not always be right. We don't always have to accept what they say. But I think it's a move in the right direction for us to actually have something, for the government to actually have some suggestions as to how we can make the legislation stronger. And if it is, the point I'm getting at is this. Sometimes we just need to be a little bit more.
Senator Ramdeen, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. Sometimes we probably need to push a little harder or make one more request. I don't expect that the Attorney General will be begging anyone for responses to his requests for proposed legislation or suggestions. But I think that the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Law Association, and the Criminal Bar are clearly 3 institutions from which all of us can benefit: the government, the opposition, and we have the benefit of very learned senior counsel on the independent bench, which we are lucky to have in the presence of Senior Counsel Choate. But at the end of the day, Madam President, we can all collectively come together for the benefit of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to pass legislation in the best interest. And what this exercise demonstrates, Madam President, is that with the right attitude and the right leadership, that we can get there and get it done. This piece, we have gotten here, and I don't apologize for repeating it. We've gotten here, and we are here today after this piece of legislation has passed through the lower house because the opposition wanted to get it passed. And I want to say one thing before concluding, Madam President, is this. The government of the day always repeats that while in opposition, they supported 95% of legislation that was brought by the People's Partnership Government. And that may factually be so. But we have given to this government 30 months, 2.5 years. The Attorney General made reference and gave reasons why in 2016 he said they wanted 2 years. They've gotten 30 months from the opposition, which is more than they asked for in 2016. But I want to remind the country of one thing. When the People's Partnership Government brought perhaps one of the most groundbreaking pieces of legislation that could have fought crime and criminality, and this morning when I was doing some research, after the case of Watson in Jamaica, one of the first things that the Jamaican government did was categorize murders. And when we brought the constitutional amendment bill, while we were in government, we did not get the support of the government, not even for 30 months. We didn't. And when we brought the bill to allow army and police to patrol this country, we did not get the support of the government. And those were perhaps, Madam President, in my respectful view, two of the most groundbreaking pieces of legislation that may, if they were passed then, with the then opposition support, we might not have found ourselves in the position that we find ourselves in today. So we must not have short memories. We have today decided as an opposition, guided by the leader of the opposition, to support the government and to give the government the support that they've asked for. They've said the people of this country, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, need this legislation, and they've been asking for it. They will get it with opposition support. But, Madam President, as I've said before, we will be doing a disservice not only to ourselves, but more importantly to each and every citizen of this country if the government does not resource the essential departments of the protective services with the resources that they need. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Forensic Science Center, the Homicide Division, the Anti-Gang Unit. If we do not weed out the corrupt elements, because, Madam President, we have a situation going on right now, where 3 officers of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service are suspended because they didn't take a report. And today, the persons who suffered the most from that are being buried and put to rest. God rest their souls too. But where would we be when this legislation is passed and somebody calls the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in any police station and they tell you, we'll check on that or we'll come back another day? We're not going to get anywhere, and we will continue to lose the girls, the women, the mothers, the fathers, the sisters, and brothers. We will be losing all of them at a rate that is unprecedented, and we cannot continue like that. Whether we sit here or we sit there, our main priority is the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And, Madam President, I hope that the government uses the support that we give them in the best interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Senator Mahabir.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, as I join in this debate, I could not help but reflect on our Constitution, the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and the United States Constitution, which offers a lot of insights for us, though our legal system is different. Madam President, in the US Constitution, there is the Second Amendment, which offers the U.S. citizen the right to bear arms. The right to bear arms essentially for two purposes. First, so that at the time that that country was being founded, the local militias could be called upon at will to defend the state from aggression. So there was a reason for that right to bear arms. And second, there was the view that every citizen has that innate right to defend himself if he faces aggression or threat. That right to bear arms does not exist in our Constitution. And under rights enshrined, Madam President, 4A, the Constitution guarantees us the right of the individual to life, liberty, security of the person, and enjoyment of property, and the right not to be deprived of except by due process of law. Our Constitution furnishes that right to ensure that we have a right to be free from aggression and free from threat. But because it does not give us a right to bear arms, it means that implicitly there is a responsibility for the state to provide the protection and for the state to bear the arms. That is the responsibility of the state. And I will touch on some areas covered by Senator Ramdeen. And I too would like to focus on the fact of where exactly our failure has been in ensuring that rights enshrined 4A has often been violated for citizens in Trinidad and Tobago. Key in 4A constitutional rights, the right to liberty and life and security of the person, is the police force of Trinidad and Tobago. And we need to ask ourselves the following: is our police service efficient? And by efficient, we simply mean, Madam President, are they, with the resources that they have, discharging their responsibilities so that the mandate that they have to defend our constitutional rights are, in fact, so discharged? When I look at the detection rate in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, I understand that for the most serious of violent crimes, which is murder, the detection rate is maximum 20%. Sometimes it goes a bit lower, but it's 1 in 5. When I compared jurisdictions, I had discussions with individuals associated with the British police force. Their detection rate is within a reasonable period of time, so I was advised, 9 out of 10 murders. And the one that they did not detect within a reasonable time is placed on a file so that it is eventually solved. There are very few cold cases, so that there are some crimes, murder crimes, that they solve quickly, some which take a lot more time, but on average, their detection rate is a bit higher. Why is our detection rate so low in comparison? Again, a point alluded to by Senator Ramdeen. When it comes to domestic crime, it is true. The police cannot be in a household to prevent domestic spousal abuse, child abuse. However, when a protection order has been issued by the courts, and we were told in a Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, that these protection orders are then subsequently lodged with the nearest police station where the aggrieved individual lives. It means that the police officers are aware that there is a potential perpetrator, someone who is a troublemaker, someone who can do harm to one of our helpless citizens, and he has to keep an eye out. She has to keep an eye out. Why is it, and we were told that there is a process and a procedure, why is it time and time again when reports are made by abused women in Trinidad and Tobago in general that the reports are not acted upon promptly, and unfortunately, it results in the murder of our fellow citizens. It is the job of the police to keep an eye out on, this is not an unknown individual now. This is someone who has made threats, someone who has acted out his anger in the past, and the police is quite aware who the person is. Why do they allow protection orders to be violated so frequently? That is a job for policing. Madam President, there is the issue of trust with the police service. Not so long ago, the police service of Trinidad and Tobago engaged in a day of total policing, which was the subject of another Joint Select Committee inquiry. And they caused untold discomfort to the citizens in the northern part of Trinidad and Tobago. Trust was violated, and the police force, the police officers, the police organization is asking for the Parliament to give them additional powers so that they can fight crime. Madam President, the police service has to restore trust. They must become more efficient, and they must compare themselves to international best practice. We ask ourselves, with less resources in the 60s and 70s, under commissioners like Tony May and Randolph Burrows, how come they were able to fight crime with a greater amount of competence? What has happened since the days of Randolph Burrows to now? Madam President, there is a problem when we are asked to pass a law such as this anti-gang bill, which suspends so much human rights, and to give power to an organization like the police force, which is not displaying the level of efficiency we would like them to display to the population. And the reason for the concern is that they may abuse this power. We want the power that is given to them to be used against the nefarious forces in the society. And we want to ensure that the legitimate law-abiding citizens in Trinidad and Tobago do not fall under this net, so that it is the criminal element which will be targeted and the rest of the population will be immune from any abuse of the law. Madam President, there was an SSA bill. I did not support the SSA bill. It is law. But I think it's important to demonstrate why I am supporting this bill, but not the SSA. And the reason I did not support the SSA was clear. I did not think, not that the SSA should not have the powers, but I think they had not proved themselves capable, given all the high-profile crimes which I thought intelligence should have solved. Cocaine in juice tins, landing in the port of Boston, bringing Trinidad and Tobago in so much disrepute internationally. I thought the SSA should have been doing those things. For this reason, I thought I needed to see more institutional strengthening before they are entrusted with the powers given on the SSA. But, Madam President, notwithstanding my concerns with the existing state of policing in Trinidad and Tobago, despite the potential for abuse, and I do hope we will be looking at how we will minimize the abuse of the powers that will be granted to the police with this piece of legislation. Why is it now that we need to look at the existing environment and ask ourselves whether we can afford not to pass this law, which can be draconian? When I look at the statistics, the Honorable Attorney General did not forward much statistics. I'm sure he has it. The statistics I have are only murder statistics. We can trace what has happened to criminality over a 20-year period. 1998 to 2018 furnishes us with 2 decades of data. And in 1998, I know there were some 15,000 violent crimes, that is wounding with intent, aggravated assaults. But in 1998, there were 98 murders in Trinidad and Tobago. That is the most serious of the violent crimes. And today, 2018, given the trend, what we have seen in the first quarter of this year, what we saw in last year. It may very well be 498. Let's hope it is under 500. And this means that from 1998, for the 2000s onwards, we have seen a rate of growth of violent crime, of which murder is the pinnacle, averaging some 9% per annum compounded. Every year it's 9% more than the previous year, 9%. And so we have moved from 98 to close in this year. If the trend continues, we may just be around 500. And Madam President, when you see such a rate of growth of any activity, you ask yourself, what could possibly be the underlying causes for this rapid? So the 80s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, stability with respect to violent crimes, and then we saw an escalation from 2000 onwards. Well, there is, Madam President, investigation in my own line of work, growth theory, and there is something known as increasing returns. Increasing returns simply says this: if you add 10% more labor to your process and 10% more capital, so you scale up labor and capital by 10%, output can rise by 15% or 20%. So a 10% increase in outputs can give you a 20% increase in output. What causes that? That's increasing returns. Of course, you can get constant returns, 10% labor, 10% capital, 10% output. Or you can get diminishing returns. What we have seen in criminality is an escalation of criminal activity in Trinidad and Tobago, growing at 9%, and it warrants investigation. When we saw that in the post-war era, we observed Germany and Japan growing at similar rates. And we ask ourselves what had happened. What had happened was that within the economy there were changes. And the changes there were technical change. What has happened in Trinidad and Tobago? What has happened in Trinidad and Tobago? And we need to ask ourselves why it has happened, but we know what has happened. We have seen a plethora of organized crime. No longer is it one-on-one crime. No longer is it only the robbery, the theft, the crime of opportunity by an individual who sees an unlocked car with a key and he drives in it. We are seeing an organization. And what does organization do? And the intent of the legislation is really to undermine these organizations. They are positive organizations. It was eminent economist Ronald Coase, 1937, the nature of the firm, classic article. Why do firms exist? He said they existed simply because they are the most efficient form of production. Reason is, within a firm there is specialization of functions. The CEO does what he does best. The supervisor does what she does best. The worker on the ground does what he does best. And so everyone in his field of specialization will, at the end of a production period, produce much more in that combination than if they were each on their own performing a range of disparate tasks. So specializations give rise to efficient firms in the formal sector. And what we know now is that specialization can also be transferred to the informal illegal sector. And now we understand why, if there is a group of individuals, we now call them a gang. I want to refer to that, because a concern I have, Madam President, is how do you prove? The problem is, how are we going to prove some of these things? I leave that to the attorneys with experience in the criminal courts. But coming to what we need to do, we need to understand why the criminality has escalated with increasing returns. Because if you are speaking about the theft of an automobile or a group of persons who engage in this activity, and you have someone who is able to start the car, that's his specialty, who can go through the hot wiring and do whatever they have to do, someone who can drive a car very carefully, someone who can dismantle it very, very efficiently as well, and someone who can find a sale for the part or who can do whatever he has to do to sell, we know that that criminal enterprise is going to be no different in efficiency from any formal firm in the economy. And when you have these enterprises, criminal enterprises, which are so well organized, we now know why the level of criminality is escalating. Organization brings with it efficiency, but it's not the type of efficiency that we want. This is destruction. This is disruptive. This is a type of activity that undermines our social fabric, and it threatens everything in the formal part of the economy. And we must do, as a society, understanding why criminality is so rampant, what we must do in the legislative chamber to undermine the growth of gangs. But this is only legislative. My concern, shared with Senator Ramdeen, is what is the executive arm, the police, going to do to reform itself, to change its structure, so that taking this piece of legislation, if it is passed, will give them a greater capability to fight the criminal element. A criminal gang is no different from a firm, an organization. You have someone at the top, organizer, that's a gang leader as per the definition in the bill. You have the supervisors, you have those who are engaged in the foot soldiering work, and the rewards, to which I will come, are going to be similarly situated, where in our world, the CEO can earn many multiples over the worker on the floor. The same applies in the informal sector with respect to the rewards of criminal activity. But, Madam President, this growth of gang, the growth of gang activity is something that, if we do not stop, will cause greater and greater harm. Why? Because just as in the formal economy, a firm like Microsoft and Apple, which are firms that we see, are associated with firms like Cisco, NVIDIA, and Sun Microsystems. We hardly know them. But one industry, the computer industry, will spawn a number of others. And it is not surprising to me that one criminal activity, maybe the narco trade, will spawn other activities, because once individuals on the ground see the profits to be made by engaging in group activities, by specializing, using their skills, they are going to target a number of areas that I have seen in the Schedule 1. So it's not surprising that we are going to have narcotics, and we're going to have auto theft, a number of other activities. I do have some suggestions for the Honorable Attorney General as to what we can add to the schedule, but it is also not surprising to me that the detection rate in murder is so low in Trinidad and Tobago. Because if in the criminal underworld there are individuals who are specialists in enforcing their version of their law, they are going to be so efficient at murder that it will be difficult to identify, since it is not conducted by someone who is a novice in the field. It is a specialist in the underworld. And unless we outlaw this activity, unless we take steps to ensure that not only are they outlawed, but they are eliminated, I don't think we will ever be able to solve this problem of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, let me focus on a few clauses of the bill. And under Part 1 preliminary definitions. See, I see the definition of a gang, and I am sure that the lawyers in our chamber may have views maybe similar to what I am going to advance. A gang means a combination of two or more persons, whether formally or informally organized. A formal organization, as far as I am aware, is an organization that is registered in the company's register, and you can see exactly that company is a formally registered company. Are there gangs in Trinidad and Tobago that are formally registered in the company register of Trinidad and Tobago? I thought all gangs were informal, and that there is no paper trail. They just know who they are, and there is nothing for me to prove that they actually have been an incorporated business entity. So my concern is, how are we going, if the majority of gangs are not formally registered anywhere, how are we going to prove that two or more persons informally organized engage in activities? They can always say, well, we were not. It's their word. It's their say. Is it that we are going to take evidence from some other person who says, I know that they are together in this gang, and I know they engage in the types of activities which are in Schedule 1. It is taking someone's word. I don't know if the rules of evidence will have to be changed to enforce this law, or whether existing rules of evidence will suffice. But my own concern with the informal gang is because it is informal, the proof of existence, unlike our sector of the economy, simply does not exist. I see gang leader means a person who initiates, organizes, plans. I always thought someone who organizes and who plans is the same. So maybe there is some duplicity in the words. I know what the Honorable Attorney General wishes to get at, but I think we need to ask ourselves, how are we going to prove all of these things in the court of law? Again, Madam President, in the first schedule, I have seen a couple of activities that I am not so sure, evidence to the contrary, of course, I am not so sure that they're gang-related. I see item number 22, rape, item number 23, grievous sexual assault. I always thought rape and sexual assault were more one-on-one crime, and that the gangs that we are speaking about are more economic gangs, gangs which are designed to usurp resources in the informal economy via extortion, narco-trafficking, and so on. But I don't know, I really don't know whether rape and grievous sexual assault belong in the category. I am sure the Honorable Attorney General will let us know whether gangs are established specifically for this purpose. But the more important concern, Madam President, is that I have not seen in the schedule what I consider to be a particularly worrying gang-related activity, and that is money laundering. Money laundering has to involve an organized structure, and money laundering is the money part to kidnapping, kidnapping for ransom. So we do have kidnapping, kidnapping for ransom, but once we are kidnapping for ransom, I am not seeing the crime of laundering the ransomed money or the crime of laundering the money from the narco trade as a gang-related activity. And I think that if this, we would look at the schedule to determine whether this should not be added into the schedule. And some, and maybe a couple of them removed, but I wait for the Attorney General. He has the evidence, I don't. But I am sure money laundering should find itself somewhere in this particular schedule. There is another crime that I know is gang-related because I actually spoke to someone in prison when I visited recently. This was an individual who was in prison, a person with a BSc in computer science, and his job was to provide people with cards to steal money from ATM machines. And so you had someone with computer capabilities computer capabilities, who was able to do the needful, and they would engage in what I consider to be electronic crime, so that too may be a crime that we would want to put into the schedule. Let me focus, Madam President, on Clause 13. Just briefly, Clause 13, and I'm looking at Clause 13.2. Clause 13.2, it says, 13.1, 13.2, it's a person who conceals for the purposes of subsection 1A, a person commits an offense if in response to an inquiry from a police officer as to the whereabouts of the gang leader or the gang member, the person does not reveal the whereabouts to the police officer, despite knowing where that person is located. I know the bill indicates quite clearly and recognizes that the definition of a child, someone under 18. But in reading 13.2, I asked myself, suppose the police officers come knocking on the door and they meet the 16-year-old child of this gang leader or gang member. And the 16-year-old child knows exactly where the brother or the father or the mother is. But the 16-year-old decides, I am not telling you, police, because that's my mother, father, or brother. Is it that this particular child will face the same consequences of, I think, some large period of time, or is it that we are going to have extenuating circumstances? It was not clear to me, because clearly the 16-year-old is fully aware where the gang member is. The 16-year-old has not revealed it is a relative, but the 16-year-old is a child. What is going to be the penalty, if any, in this situation? So I wait the Honorable Attorney General to provide some kind of assurance as to what is going to happen if 13.2 refers to the child of the gang member or a sibling. Madam President, 15.1. Ordinarily, as I said, Madam President, I will not support this piece of legislation. This is draconian. It reminds me of the Public Order Act. There was somewhere in the 1970s that one of the attorney generals came under so much heavy fire for. But the circumstances, you see, the circumstances. The Honorable Attorney General, in my mind, is correct. We need to ask ourselves, where does the balance lie with respect to the responsibility of the state to protect all citizens and the powers to be given by the state in protecting the citizens, which may abridge the rights of some individuals deemed to be the perpetrators. So in the balance, I am weighing in favor of the general population. Under 15.1, it says, and this is where the power lies, a police officer may arrest without a warrant a person whom he has reasonable cause to believe is a gang leader or gang member, or who he has reasonable cause to believe has committed an offense under this act. It said a police officer, any police officer. Is it someone, Madam President, a recruit just out of the training academy, and he has reason to believe, but he has no experience, he's only a month in the force? I would have thought this power of arrest, which is such a major power, and you are giving the officer the right to imprison someone for 3 days, that's what the law is going to do. We are giving this officer, without saying who he is, the right to take someone whom he has reason to believe. How he came about this reason has not been spelled out. I imagine that there is a police protocol so that the reason can be well articulated. Not that I don't like this person, I think he is up to no good, I will take him in for 3 days. I would like to see some protocols with respect to how you come to the conclusion that this individual is a potential gang member. But also, Madam President, I am not comfortable with any police officer being given this power to arrest. I would like a police officer of a particular rank so just to sign off. So a recruit tells him, I think this person is in the gang and he is doing some really things which are attractive to the welfare of the society. And I would like a superior officer to say, give me the evidence you have. It should not be cumbersome, bureaucratic. You simply whisper to him, and the superior officer says, yes, I agree. You can go ahead and you can arrest him and interrogate him for 3 days. And while he is being interrogated, I would like to think that there is no torture involved anywhere in the prison system, in the police system of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to put that on the record. We are keeping someone for 3 days. I'm not sure what the procedures are, but I would like to place on the record that I am not going to be in support of torturing anyone to get evidence. Let us get evidence in a different way, interrogating without the kinds of activities we have seen in other parts of the world. I would like to recommend for the Honorable Attorney General that there should be a superior officer involved, especially when we are issuing the arrest. I think Senator Ramdeen did allude to that point. And Madam President, if any one of us here has to apply for a permit to cremate someone, a relative, it happened to me a few years ago. My aunt, 91 years old, very close to me. I am responsible for the funeral. Died at Mount Hope. Everything normal. I had to wait for 3 hours at the Chaguanas police station for a cremation permit, simply because, and the officers were very kind and nice to me. They don't want me mixing and mingling with the undesirable. They are really good. But they said, only someone of the rank of inspector and above can sign the certificate. All the documents are in order. So something as routine as that requires an inspector to sign off, but we are giving any police officer of any rank the option to detain someone, arrest him, and imprison him for up to 3 days. And I think to make the thing a little fairer, I would like to see the police officer who is doing the arresting must have a rank, or at least he must refer to his supervising officer who has the experience. Madam President, this, as I said, is drastic law. But gangs and escalating crime go hand in hand. It does not surprise me that we have seen a rise in gangs over the last 20 years and a 9% compounded annual rate of growth in criminal activity. At one time, it was said that kidnapping was the #1 growth industry in Trinidad and Tobago. It had to be because it was organized. It had to be that you had a structure that would look at this activity and it would be planned, executed, and carried out efficiently. The leaders of these enterprises, we made the error in the past of calling them community leaders. They are community destroyers. They are not the leaders of any community, because what they do is they organize, and like in all corporate businesses, the leader at the top gets the majority of the earnings, as the CEO of a company gets the highest pay, and the young people are tempted via what the leader displays in the hope that they too can become a leader one day. The unfortunate reality is that they are tempted away from the John Donaldson Technical Institute. They are tempted away from the training offered by the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for more than half a century. They are tempted away from the opportunities offered by our education system, our COSTAT, our junior sex system in refrigeration technologies. They are tempted away from that. And they are lured into this life. And unfortunately, they do not become the leaders they aspire to become, the gang leaders. They die at 25.
Senator Mahabir, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, as I wind up, we in Trinidad and Tobago have become immune to the violence around us. Some of us who are over 50 and who grew up in the 70s remember what the 1970s was all about. All of us over 50 remember Abdul Malik, Gaylan Benson, and Jose Carrot. That was the murder of the 70s. Up to 1979, that was the big murder, and Randolph Burroughs was the one who was in charge of the thing at the time. And then we forgot what it was like. So that within recent times, when you ask someone, was there anything in news? In the 2000s, no, just a murder in Mova. And now, no, nothing in the news. It's a murder in Mova, Central, South, now all over the place. That's nothing in the news anymore. That's normal fare. But, Madam President, we remember the 70s. And sometimes when we travel abroad, as I did a couple of weeks ago, and you walk the streets in peace, in contentment, and without a lack of fear. I went into some streets, Madam President, dark. I am the only person there. I met one person on the street, a lady on a mobile wheelchair, and she actually stopped me to chat. I said, but lady, you must be mad. I could be a raving lunatic. And her position was, no, just chat with me. I'm the only person around here, and I haven't spoken to someone in quite a while. You know that if there's any harm to that lady on that street, there is a cruiser not far. There's trust in the police force. And as soon as you return to Trinidad and Tobago, it's as if you have moved into a different environment. You jump into your car from the airport and you keep looking back, looking right, looking the front, looking all over the place. This is for us because we have remembered. There is, Madam President, a group of persons who have grown up with fear. I think it is true. The legislative arm of the state cannot do it alone. But I think we must do what we have to do. But we absolutely must now look at the police service in Trinidad and Tobago. And with the power that they now have, we need to hold them to book. Ask them, say, there's a joint select committee in Parliament. I would love to have a public inquiry into why are you all so inefficient. With an inefficient police force, no amount of legislation will eliminate the fear. But once we could reform our police service, and once we do what we have to do in the legislative arm of the state, I think gradually, Madam President, we may begin to turn the tide, and we would maybe get back to where we were in the 70s. I thank you.
Minister of Labour and Small Enterprises.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this debate. And you know, Madam President, yesterday was indeed a golden day. A golden day from my perspective because we have seen the first female president inauguration yesterday, and we wish to congratulate her. I wish to congratulate her. I am elated. You know, Madam President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, in her maiden speech, spoke to us as citizens of this country. And one thing that resonated with me, she said, be the light and be the hope. So my discourse today, Madam President of the Senate, I intend to be that light and to show hope with regards to this piece of legislation. So, Madam President, the phenomenon, gangs, it's not a new phenomenon in this country. However, over the last 15 years, we have had cause to become extremely concerned. Madam President, the extreme forms of violence among gangs and gang members is becoming the norm. And therefore, any responsible government must address that issue. I want to just make this point, Madam President. I heard a previous speaker on the other side spoke about the opposition supporting this piece of legislation. And for the records, I want to point out that it was only based on pressure from John Public, the ordinary citizens of this country, demanding that the piece of legislation be brought back to Parliament, that the opposition decided that they will give its support, but decided they will not give the full support. And I want to put it on records here too, Madam President, that when we were on that side, we gave them, who was the then government, full support and voted for the same piece of legislation for a 5-year period. A 5-year period. And it is necessary that we remind them of that. But, Madam President, I would like to proceed to indicate that this House may recall the ruthless beheading of a man whose head was found on Nelson Street in Port-au-Spain in September 2013. The Police Social and Welfare Association was quoted as saying that the beheading represented, and I quote, a message that is sent from one gang or group to another. Madam President, this incident was specifically mentioned in a 2013 report of the Council of Hemispheric Affairs entitled Gangs Are the New Law in Urban Trinidad and Tobago, which quoted Dr. Max Manwaring, a professor of military strategy in the Strategic Studies Institute of the United States Army War College, as stating that gangs in Trinidad and Tobago, and I quote, have become so ubiquitous that they represent a challenge to state sovereignty, close quotation. Madam President, the report further stated that gangs in Trinidad and Tobago, and I quote, specifically in high-risk areas, have become so institutionalized that they pose a threat to and even control, in some cases, the Republic's crucial infrastructures, such as the Unemployment Relief Program, close quotation. Madam President, I don't think it is surprising to any one of us in this chamber or even out there to be surprised by the anecdotal stories that are floating around out there. And one in particular I recall is a citizen of this country being behind bars, but drawing a salary from the URP, Madam President. And that went on for years. But, Madam President, more recently in January of this year, the nation was jolted mere days into the new year on the first day of the new school term by the horrific news of a deadly gang-related attack in Mova that claimed the lives of 2 young men and injured 2 others when gunmen opened fire on a taxi in which they were traveling, causing it to explode and to burn 3 of the persons in that vehicle. So that, Madam President, gang-related activity has permeated into almost every sphere of criminal activity in this country, particularly the more serious offenses, such as murders, kidnappings, and of course we would have been able to reduce kidnapping in this country, Madam President, and the trafficking of narcotics. Madam President, statistics compiled by the Criminal Gang and Intelligence Unit shows that as at 2014, gang-related murders accounted for 35% of all murders in this country. As of 2016, this percentage remained fairly steady. Given the aggressive metastasis of gang and gang activity, this figure, Madam President, is expected to increase. And Madam President, it would increase beyond our widest expectations if we do not afford the police officers in this country with the legislative tool in controlling gang activity in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, statistics compiled by the Criminal Gang and Intelligence Unit show that for the period January 1st, 2016 to June 30th, 2017, this country witnessed an exponential rise in gangs and gang membership. There were 147 gangs and 1,698 gang members in the first quarter of 2016. This increased to 179 gangs and 2,038 gang members by the last quarter of 2016. By the second quarter of 2017, these figures jumped to 211 gangs and 2,459 gang members, Madam President. The statistics also show us that between 2014 and July 2017, there was 129% increase in the number of gangs from 92 to 211. There was also a 63% increase in gang membership from 1,500 to 2,459 persons. Madam President, this is a situation that warrants the kind of action that this government has placed in another place, and it is before us today. Madam President, gang violence is becoming more frequent and more deadly. Gangs today appear to be more violent and lethal than their predecessors. And my good senatorial friend, Dr. Mahabir, in sharing his experience, he did not tell us which part of the world he was and how safe he felt there and how frightened and unsafe he felt coming back to this country. But in doing so, his last winding up statement to me reflected the need for this legislation, although he has said he will not support the legislation. His sharing...
I said I will be supporting
it. You will? Okay. I humbly apologize. So, Madam President, I shall go no further on that point. So that, Madam President, researchers have attributed the increases in both the frequency and seriousness of gang-related crime to the increased availability of extremely sophisticated weapons. The changing nature of weaponry has influenced the very nature of gang behavior. And Madam President, all of us, when we go on social media, we see young citizens of Trinidad and Tobago displaying the most ferocious pieces of weaponry. I mean, you wonder, and you know, as my grandmother would say, you're seeing mother's milk on these young children's faces. They are your children, they are our children, Madam President. But the boldness with which that they display these weaponry and the messages, I heard one particular message sent out to the police service of this country, what they will not do with the police of this country because they have the weaponry. And therefore, we have to arm our police officers of this country. We have to empower them to impose the law, to carry out the law. And this piece of legislation is that critical piece of legislation that is required, Madam President. Madam President, gang activity in this beloved space that we call Trinidad and Tobago is no longer confined to the underworld or contained within certain geographical parameters. There is now increased visibility due to a corrosive gang culture that has taken place and has taken root within our youth in this country, Madam President. And we ought to be very, very concerned. I had an experience recently, a very decent young man, decent, comes from a very good family, decent people. And he got caught up in the gang culture, not at home, Madam President, believe it or not, in school, in the secondary school. The entire neighborhood was shocked because this is a decent young man. But you see, the gang culture is such that there are various ways in which they entice and they influence the young people of this country. Madam President, statistics collected in the Besson Street Gang Intelligence Criminal History Project, conducted by Charles Katz and David Choate in 2006, showed that at that time, the majority of gang members, and they cited 85.2% of gang members in Trinidad and Tobago were young adults between the ages of 18 and 45. Only a small proportion, 5.3%, was 17 years or younger. That dynamic has changed, Madam President. In their 2010 report, that was in 2006, in their 2010 report entitled Understanding and Preventing Gang Membership in Trinidad and Tobago, researchers Charles Katz, David Choate, and David Fox stated that in this country, the mean age of first gang involvement was 12.9 years, Madam President. This is frightening. This is frightening not only to those of us who are mothers and grandmothers, all of us who have young children must be, not only young children, our nieces, our nephews, our neighbors' children, we must become concerned that the gang culture is infiltrating into the schools at 12.9 years, Madam President. The gang culture has infiltrated into the primary school. This House may recall the contribution of the Honorable Fitzgerald Hines in the House of Representatives in December 2017 in relation to the Anti-Gang Bill of 2017, when he stated that his information received from teachers in the Mova-Laventil area was that children in the primary schools, children, Madam President, ages 6 years to 12 years, had begun to manifest the division between the Muslim gangs and the Rasta City gangs. 6 years to 12 years. Madam President, gangs pose a particular threat because of their organized structure and their potential for expansion with the recruitment of new members. And Madam President, we are now faced with the internet, a tool of empowerment that is being used as a tool of destruction. The internet is now a critical recruiting tool. It is a quick and easy means to foster gang size and solidarity by using just a few strokes on your computer. Using the internet, gangs are able to reach our particularly vulnerable youth who are looking for a sense of belonging. The 2010 report by Katz, Choate, and Fox stated that at the time of their study, 42% of youths interviewed stated that they joined gangs of friendship. This is not a dream. This is an actual study that was done in this country, Madam President. 29% joined for protection. 8% joined to make money. 6% joined because a family member was in a gang. And 15% joined for other reasons. Madam President, gangs have found new power through the internet. Gang members have become emboldened, and they have taken to social media to advertise their nefarious affiliation. The street graffiti which served as a billboard for gang activities in years gone by when I was a little younger, perhaps, as a means for gangs to mark their territory, to mark off their turf, to intimidate, to provoke and disrespect each other. Rival gangs, as well as law-abiding citizens, have gone viral and virtual with the advent of the internet, Madam President. We are all familiar with the videos that are circulating widely on social media in which gang members taunt other groups and brandish and discharge their up-to-date weaponry. In many instances, they have more modern weapons than the police who have to protect us, Madam President. The pace and visibility at which social media allows individuals to communicate allows gang members to provoke each other more quickly and publicly than ever before and to exert their dominance. And Madam President, this fuels inter-gang conflict, which has a propensity to result in many fatalities. We see the bodies dropping, Madam President. Young men, the future of this country, dying at a very young age because they are engaged in gang activity. Madam President, gangs and gang-related activities and gang violence affects each one of us. This issue is a part of the societal ill that attacks both individuals and communities. It matters not if you are UNC, PNM, PDP, MEP, or whatever P's, Madam President. It creates an environment of fear, and self-imposed curfews are already the norm in Trinidad and Tobago. Our beloved newly inaugurated president indicated to us yesterday she too drive with her vehicle locked, windows up, a norm. Madam President, the expiration of the 2011 Anti-Gang Act on the 14th of August 2016 has literally crippled the police force in combating the scourge of crime, as it had stripped the police service of a very vital piece of artillery in the fight against gangs and gang-related criminal activities in this country. Madam President, the plea for assistance from the police force must be answered. This House may recall that 6 weeks after the expiration of the Anti-Gang Act of 2011, head of the Central Division, Senior Superintendent Faris Al-Rawi, lamented the fact that 620 prisoners believed to have been involved in criminal activity were able to access bail as a result of the expiration of the 2011 Anti-Gang Act. The relevant article was published on page A7 of the Trinidad Guardian of October 5th, 2016. In that same article, Madam President, General Secretary of the Police Service and Welfare Association, Inspector Anand Ramesa, was quoted as saying, and I quote, "The expiration of the legislation remove one of the tools in the police armory in their fight against crime," close quotation. Madam President, this House may also recall that the Organized Crime Intelligence Unit of the Police Service was launched in September 2017 to pursue, to target, to dismantle, to disrupt, to prosecute organized criminal groups and networks. This unit is a merger of two substantial police agencies, the Organized Crime, Narcotics and Firearms Bureau and the Criminal Gang and Intelligence Unit, and serves as a more efficient entity in addressing the issue of gangs. In its paper entitled The Reenactment of Anti-Gang Act 2017, the Organized Crime Unit stated, and I quote, "The now defunct anti-gang legislation of 2011 provided an essential deterrent in the commission of serious crimes committed by violent organized criminal gangs in Trinidad and Tobago," close quotation, Madam President. So then, Madam President, in the absence of anti-gang legislation, an effective tool was lost to the law enforcement agency, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in this country. Further, Madam President, in January of this year, head of the Northeastern Division, Senior Superintendent Surendra Sagram Singh, reiterated the supplication of the police force and was quoted in the Trinidad Guardian in an article dated the 11th of January 2018 as saying, and I quote, "Police officers will have more power to put gang members behind bars if the anti-gang legislation is approved," close quotation. Madam President, even the acting commissioner of police himself, Stephen Williams, stated in February 2017 that a renewal of the anti-gang legislation is in the country's best interest. So then, Madam President, we law-abiding citizens, we who are in this hallowed chamber, we who are here to create laws for the peace and sustenance of this country, we cannot allow gangs to continue with their warfare on our police force and on our citizens, Madam President. It is our solemn duty as the Parliament to provide reinforcement to those who are on the front lines, our police officers who put their lives on the line. Every day they go out there to report for duty on their various shifts. We can do this by the passage of this anti-gang bill of 2018. Madam President, there are essentially three primary strategies to address the issue of gangs: prevention, intervention, and suppression. Prevention programs are designed to identify and amend the factors associated with gang membership. For instance, by strengthening family and community structures. Intervention programs are designed to direct youth out of the gangs, for instance, by gang awareness and youth sporting and entrepreneurship initiatives. And in that context, Madam President, I would want to commend and highlight the excellent work being done by Clayton Morris. And I'm quoting, Madam President, from page 42 of the Newsday of Sunday, March.
Minister, at this stage, honorable senators, we will suspend and we will resume proceedings at 2 p.m. So we are suspended until 2 p.m.